You're listening to the Vent Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vent Podcast. My name is Brady, joined in the studio by Billy Galenko. Billy, we're both wearing, for those of our listeners on YouTube, we're both wearing like a pleated sweater.
Quilted, if you will.
Quilted, yeah. Not would I say pleated? Yeah, that's not right. Quilted sweater. Pleated pants, quilted sweater. That's actually funny on the pleated side. Was watching episode of Seinfeld the other day. Do you know Seinfeld?
I've heard of it, yes.
Yeah. Oh, you've heard
famous.
of it. Okay. The one where Kramer learns from the conductor how to not get a crease in your pants and how to keep the pleat in your pants before you're like going to a nice event. You just take them off and you hang them up on a hanger. And so you lounge around in your underwear until you're ready to go. So the pleat doesn't go in the pants. But
we're continuing the theme that you're younger than me, but you know more older things than I do. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Older wine preferences, older TV show preferences.
Nice. Well, how was your weekend? You have anything unique or interesting to drink?
Let's see. Had some whiskeys. What were you drinking? I feel like talked about whiskey too much on the podcast. It's just what I've been drinking more because my wife's pregnant, and so there's a higher cost to opening a bottle and not having someone to drink it with. So I've been drinking more whiskeys. Of course, that is a good ad for Coravin. I should be using my Coravin a little bit more. Getting a glass of wine out of my closed bottles, but actually, yeah, I want to talk about the whiskeys I had. I picked up some Irish cream. I've been wanting Irish cream for my coffee for a while now. Haven't pulled the trigger. Picked up a little bottle. $14, keeps in your fridge for 6 months. Really delightful way to end an evening.
Nice. All right, well then I'll talk about mine a bit. I've had a red wine little adventure this weekend. Wasn't a goal, but it ended up being the result. So I did use my Coravin one evening. I actually have been Coravining the farm, the big game that they sent me over a long period of time. Yeah, that was really good. It's shown well every time. It's a perfect wine to Coravin too, because a little bit of air gets in over time Coravining, but it's just been allowing it to develop nicely since I've been drinking it. So It's been great. I've had a glass every weekend or so. But then following that, we went to a newer, well, it's not newer, but new to me, wine and cheese and tin fish establishment downtown here in LA. And it's interesting. It's called Kippered, Kippered. And I had heard about it originally on Marketplace on NPR. I know you mentioned you might not listen, but for our listeners, basically in the mornings and the evenings, but in the evenings, NPR has a segment called Marketplace. The host is Kai Risdall. He's actually based here in LA. And part of what they do is like a small business segment. They interview people throughout the country who are just trying to make it on a small business. And this lady had come on a couple of times. She's a cheesemonger. She was originally in this it's called Grand Central Market. It's basically a place with like food stalls. And she had been there for a while with DTLA cheese. And then when the pandemic came, downtown LA took a little step back in terms of like vibrancy and population, and a lot of stores had to close. So she had the opportunity to make that a standalone shop, which is now DTLA cheese shop. And then next door, they opened this Kippered, which is also serviced by the cheese shop. So they have cheese from the cheese shop, but then they focus on tin fish and sparkling wine, as well as other still wines. So I'd heard about it months ago. I think I mentioned it to May. At the time, she was really not into going down to downtown. It's it's bounced back really well from COVID since then. So we were down there and it was really cool. The owner, she basically she was behind the counter helping us like describe like the wines and the cheese. I think her husband was also there, who also is a co-owner. And it was really cool. I had wine-wise, started out with a chilled dolcetto, which is one of those grapes from Piemonte that's a nice, easy drinking. And sometimes they can be very simple. This one was really unique and complex to me. It's as much as a dolcetto can be. There's some depth to it. So it was actually nice even as it warmed up. And then I had a Lambrusco as well, which was 100% Ruberti grapes, which is interesting to me. It's not one of the more common Lambrusco varieties. So that was cool. Also, it was like what you would think of a quality Lambrusco is dark cherries. It wasn't too light, but had a nice acid backbone. And then one wine that I had that you might find interesting. I can't remember the producer. Maybe I'll look it up real quick, but it was a Dry Creek, like 2018 or 2019 wine that was made in a very Dry Creek style. It was Zen. I think it had some cab. There was another variety. I'm blanking on it right now, but it was 15.6 alcohol, which was quite the
Wow.
big boy.
You said it was Zinfandel?
It was a majority. The first grape they listed was Zinfandel. It's like Zinfandel Cab and something else. It could have been Petit Syrah or something like that. It was a giant wine, but it was a few years old, and we had it when we had the cheese. And I also asked her, and I got a half pour. I didn't have to drink a whole glass of
Hmm.
15.6% alcohol. But it was really neat because like she was able to explain that time we had gotten some cheese. We had a goat milk or goat cheese and sheep's cheese with these interesting pairings and bread. But she was able to explain to me the cheese me and I on such a complex level. I realized now it was the same level of stuff that I explain wine to people on. Like we started here and then we're like reaching the bounds of what I even comprehended. But I loved it because I was like, she was just so passionate about it. And I was learning like left and right. And then luckily she said they were going to have cheese classes where they explain more of the process and how
Oh,
they
that's
end
cool.
up the way they do in January. So it was a really cool experience. And the wines paired really well with the cheese. And obviously the cheese was great.
Did you have any fish?
Not this time. No, we may had actually had tin fish earlier in the day, the week. So
Mm.
she's had tin fish out. It tends to be more her thing than mine, the tin fish. But one thing that was cool about the cheese, one was from Indiana. And I was like, how do you source this cheese? Clearly you're here. Is there a cheese conference? She's like, yes, there was a cheese conference. I met this lady that and she's like, oh yeah. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, of course there's a conference for everything. And then she went on to tell us about how this lady was like the OG like master or like boss of like American cheese, like really brought cheese into its own over the past like 40 years, but she's still alive. So she's like, yeah, I got to actually meet like the legend. So it's basically, I don't picture like um Mandavi back in the day, like right after he found this whole thing. And if you could just go and right now and he's still just walking around exclaiming what's great about Napa Valley. She's basically it's like the same thing. So I thought that was a really cool story as well, that she gets to meet her American cheese icons.
LA's
And
got
now
to be the only city in the country where you could open a wine, cheese, and tin fish shop downtown and survive.
they're in like Brooklyn, probably.
Huh?
Yeah.
Maybe in
Oh,
Brooklyn. Yeah, I'm just thinking that New Yorkers would be like, no, on that.
well, you'd be interested. I mean, I don't know exactly what downtown LA is not as poppin' as you would think. It's not like the hot spot to go
Okay.
normally. It's coming back, and there's a lot of really good food places down there. But this one was actually on the corner of a little less. It's like there was a building that was like getting constructed, and I actually used to go to this Planet Fitness when I first moved here. I would take the train downtown because I was still trying to pretend like I lived in like New York or elsewhere. And I'd walk by this corner, and it was like a maybe a grilled cheese place where the cheese place is now, but it wasn't that amazing and it wasn't that highly trafficked back then. Otherwise, I would have noticed this place. So I think they got in at the right time. I think that person couldn't stay afloat during the pandemic, and they got in at a good time for pricing. But I'm excited, and it was a great atmosphere. It was really well designed. So anybody in LA, go to Kippard or follow them at Get Kippard on Instagram. That was great. And then to round out my weekend, we ended up going to Korean barbecue with some friends. That was cool. We didn't have any wine there, but we did go back to our buddy's house. He's also a sommelier, and we had some quality Mencia from Ribera Sacra, which was really neat. It had that perfect balance of Mencia that was basically like earthy, but also still some nice fruit coming through. So it was nice and balanced, good acid. Highly recommend anybody check out Mencias. They're great value. And then ended with, had this probably interspersed with a Korean whiskey that was still labeled soju on the bottle. Soju's like
Mhm.
their distilled
Yeah,
spirit,
like a rice spirit,
um,
right?
typically. But it
Yeah.
turns out, and I had been watching a video before we actually went to K barbecue, that you could, well, during number one, during the Korean War and in other times of hardship, they had to ration rice. Soju started being made from sweet potatoes and some other things, anything with basically a starch. And apparently, a long time ago, according to this website, it was also made by wheat, like 100% wheat sometimes. So I look at this thing, and he called it a whiskey, and I was like, "Are you sure?" It says soju, but I looked at the bottle. It was called. Hold on, I have it here. Jinmek Soju Poets Rock, and I was like, "Oh, it says 100% wheat," and then it was barrel aged for 3 years as well. So it literally
Wow.
followed all the requirements to become a whiskey. And it was really cool. It was almost kind of spicy in the same way that some of the ryes that you and I have chatted about and are. It definitely had that spicy, almost citrus note that like a high wheat bourbon might. So that was really cool.
Nice. Yeah, what are the wine pairings for Korean barbecue? Is it like Tokai and oak Chardonnay?
I don't know if you'd add the Tokai in there. I mean, maybe dried Tokai. Something high acid, I think I would pair. Potentially a Riesling. I guess Tokai maybe was the spice.
Oh, I was going to say
from
the Korean, it's not spicy.
No, they
No.
definitely do have spiciness. But I mean, if you're going to a traditional place, they have beer and soju, and that's what you drink.
Okay. So sparkling,
You
like a
you
pet
could.
nat.
Oh yeah. I mean, that would be nice too. I've never seen a Korean barbecue place that also has wine. I mean, I'm sure they exist, but like the ones that we go to are very traditional. And I like to like our buddy is Korean and he can order and he knows everything that like the right stuff to get. So we always go with him, or at least I always go with him, and he always gets the right stuff. So I do whatever he says to do.
Sounds like you found your business partner. There's a market demand. You have an expert on the other side, and you can add the wine. Perfect.
Well, he actually wants to open up he worked in wine for a long time, as in New York and out here in the hospitality section. So he actually wants to open like a wine and cheese place in the OC where he lives more. He's been trying to convince me to do that with him, and I'm like, oh, I don't really want to work or run a shop, but it sounds like a great idea. And I told him about Kippard, and that's it. That's what I want to do, but just down here. Yeah. So it was funny. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So I guess we'll circle back. I talked about it already, but I think the wine of the week or what we're drinking this weekend, it's actually not going to come out in the Vent email, but it'll be Mencia this week. So for those, I just mentioned it, but you can find the best, most traditional expressions from Northwest Spain. If you go inland from where Albarino is grown and Rio Spices, there's a couple areas over there. One is called Ribera Sacra. Another one's called Biert. They make different wines in the regions, but Mencia is like a medium-bodied red wine, kind of like ruby in color, medium tannins. But what I love so much about it is they have so much earthy character. Some have a little bit of barnyard sometime, but not really. It tends to be this like really complex forest floor, mushrooms, like herbs, spiciness backed by some nice ripe, whether it be like blackberry, sometimes cherry, like fruit component. And then my favorite part about them is you can find really quality expressions for like, I mean, probably close to $20. They used to be under 20, probably more now, but really quality wines. A lot of the top producers from elsewhere in Spain, like in Ribera del Duero and in some of those areas, are actually coming out and building wineries there. So you can find some of the same producers making some great Mencia. So that'll be the wine of the week. I think it's also great with Thanksgiving. If you guys are listening to this the day before Thanksgiving and still need a wine that your friends probably haven't heard of and will be surprised by, I recommend Mencia.
Nice. Yeah. For some reason, also, I know it's not Mencia, but made me think of, I guess the M, made me think of Chateau Moussard, getting a bottle of their red out after all the recommendations that we had heard recently. Kind of jogged my memory.
Yeah, you should. I was eyeballing a bottle of 2012 white Chateau Moussard like last weekend. It was at a shop. And I'm still surprised that was like $80. And I was like,
yeah,
if I felt like buying it, that's such a good deal. It's just like the aged Rioja that we find sometimes, the white ones. It's just, I'm sure this is an amazing wine. It's way better than half the other wines here that are $80. So I'm happy they're carrying it. So yeah, I compliment the guy every time. I don't buy it though.
I went to a shop the other day that had speaking of, well, I guess we were talking offline about Salon, but we had there was a 3-pack of Salon in a banded OWC, but like in the shop on the shelf for $1,000 a bottle, which I was definitely not a buyer at that price point, but I know that was a good price. So I thought that was my window shopping find of the weekend in terms of value.
Nice. Also, for those, we actually don't really go to Costco anymore, but for those of you who do go to Costco in the holidays, they'll sometimes source like really nice wines and actually have them at really good prices. I think a couple years ago, there was a bottle of Sassicaia for, I don't know, it was like $280 or something, like a really good price for quality vintage. In hindsight, I probably should have gotten it. I had just really started working at Vint, so I didn't really know my price points like that well, but I should have. But anybody, keep an eye out when you're at Costco. Just because it's there doesn't mean it's a cheap wine.
Yeah, I'm excited to stop at the Costco when we go out to Oregon in early December because we don't have wine at our Costco's here.
Oh, really?
So I'm gonna stop out. Yeah, because they don't sell alcohol at grocery stores in Maryland. Any
That's
out, like
right.
not even wine. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, interesting. All right. Well, shall we get to our interview now?
Cool. Yeah, sounds good. Do you want to do the intro? Or I can.
Yeah, I will. I will do it. So, our interview this week is Julia Harding, MW, Master of Wine. For those of you who are not familiar, you may be familiar with Jancis Robinson. Julia is a very close coworker, both on the website and on a lot of the most famous books that Jancis is a part of. So, you guys were probably, maybe if you didn't know her, you definitely knew the books. A couple of the books are The Atlas to Wine, Wine Grapes, and of course, the Oxford Companion to Wine. And I can't remember exactly what the formal name of the atlas is. I think it's like the World Atlas of Wine. But what's interesting to me is it was kind of like a wine lifelong opportunity to speak with an icon. Because my very first wine book ever, which I'll talk about with her, was the wine Atlas to Wine. This was even before I liked wine. I just like maps. So I thought that was cool. And then when I was studying for my exams, it was really important for me to have access to the Oxford Companion to Wine, as well as wine grapes. So I would go to the library in New York and actually check them out. And they're expensive at the time, so you weren't allowed to take them out. So I had to sit there like Jake Gyllenhaal and read the books while I was in the library. Same library. Yeah, we did not burn any for warmth.
Chain to the shelf.
Yeah. Yeah. No day after tomorrow weather, luckily, while I was there, but it was the exact same room in the same library. So I always pictured him while I was studying. But yeah, no, she's an amazing person. So she started out in linguistics and basically editing language books. It's like how she described it. And then she was just through sheer persistence. She reached out to Jancis Robinson over time as she got more and more into wine. She completed wine studies, kept reaching out to Jancis, trying to work with her, was helping in any way that she could, eventually passed her MW and then became part of Jancis's team, both writing for the website, helping publish multiple editions now of the Oxford Companion to Wine, which the focus of this episode is on the 5th edition of the Oxford Companion to Wine, which just came out. I highly recommend everybody get it. I think it was only like $50 or so. Not that that's only for some people, but it is basically the go-to reference book for wine, but it's written in such an accessible manner. It's organized like a dictionary, A to Z, but inside there are a longer form article or blurbs on things, pictures. Everything's written in a really unique and engaging way. And all the things kind of reference other pieces in the book, so you can really get a full picture of anything you're trying to learn about. And then before I let Brady hop in here, my other piece that I learned in the interview that I thought was really cool is she, like me actually, not that I'm comparing myself to an MW, but she started studying more about wine because she thought she would enjoy the wine more or enjoy the process of the drinking more. So she just wanted to learn more and more to enhance her enjoyment of the experience. And I think that's very much aligned with how I do it. I think for me, it's more interesting to know exactly how the wine was made, where it came from, and all of that behind your glass rather than just drinking it. So I thought that was a really cool inspiration and kind of like a role model I would like to follow as well.
Yeah, and she's a real writer's writer, I think, just in terms of the way that she approaches thinking about and presenting information around wine, especially in these volumes that we talk about in the podcast a little bit. These volumes that can get like theoretical and heady and academic, especially when you're talking about like an Oxford edition that's meant to be a reference. So I really appreciate her ideas on bringing narrative into the entries that they wrote for different topics within the book. Yeah, and just building out a story around wine that anyone could pick it up, leaf through it, and get immersed, which you really can't say that about every reference book. So really appreciate the work on the Oxford Companions and just, yeah, her background that I think makes her stand out among other wine writers in the industry for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I recommend everybody go check out the Oxford Companion to Wine. Also check out the Wine Atlas and Wine Grapes. But yeah, fresh off the presses, the new Oxford Companion 5th edition. Check it out. And now, without further ado, here is our interview with Julia Harding. All right, we are here with Julia Harding, Master of Wine. Thank you so much for joining today.
It's a great pleasure.
Yeah, no, I know we talked about it a little bit on our introduction here, but Julia is one of the masterminds basically behind a lot of my favorite wine books in the world. So I actually have some here. I'll hold them up for the camera. But the Wine Atlas, which I have the newest edition here, was my first wine book ever. Actually, before I even got into wine, I just liked geography and maps. And in grad school, I just got an atlas just so I could look at it. Didn't really think I liked wine yet. And then I was telling Grady earlier, and you as well offline, that when I was in New York and actually started studying wine, I would go to the New York Library and get both the Oxford Companion, which we're here to talk about, the 5th edition today, and I have as well, and then also Wine Grapes, which is an amazing tome, or I don't know if it's considered a tome, but it's an amazing piece of work. So I'm so excited to have you here. These books have been a big part of my life. So could you tell us a little bit about how you got into wine in general, and how you got to be working on these books with Jancis Robinson and Vouillemose for the Wine Grapes?
Sure. I could say I had one of those Damascene moments with some amazing bottle of wine and my life changed completely, but I'm afraid I don't have that story to tell you. It was very much more gradual than that. I've always enjoyed wine. In my family, my father liked wine, but he didn't know that much about it. He was interested. I think he had a copy of the 2nd edition of the World Atlas of Wine, and he and my mother used to like going on holiday and bringing back a case or two of not very expensive wine just because they wanted to buy it locally. So they were by no means wine experts, and they drank wine maybe once a week. So there was a little bit of background, but not a serious background. And then at university, I drank wine like most people, met a few friends who knew a bit more than I did. And that actually is the pattern, is meeting people who knew more than I did and thinking, oh, I'd really like to know a bit more. And the key thing underneath it all was, I think if I know more, I'll enjoy it more. So it was always about wanting to enjoy wine more, being more adventurous, being able to take more risks because I knew of it more. And it was never about just knowing the information. There was always an ulterior motive, and the ulterior motive was pleasure. That's really the story. That's the thread behind the story. I lived in Bristol for a while in southwest England, and I started thinking, I think I might do a little evening class about wine. And I went to this first class. It was for the very first level of Wine and Spirit Education Trust. And I went to this class. It happened to be in the afternoon, and then other people there were people who worked at hotels who didn't seem terribly interested, to be quite honest. And this guy started talking. He wasn't particularly charismatic, but he started talking about wine, and I was completely blown away. And I thought, wow, this is the most amazing product under the sun. And the other interesting thing was, during that course, he used some of Jancis Robinson's wine course episodes that had been aired on television in the UK as part of his means of presenting. I'd always been exposed to the material that Jancis had produced, and I used to buy the Financial Times newspaper only for her column on wine. I used to throw the rest of it away and read her column. It was that process with the Wine and Spirit Education Trust courses. Then I did the next one. And then I had the cheek, I think is the best word, to contact Jancis Robinson. And I wrote to her and I said, I really like the way you write. I'm really interested in wine. I'd really like to meet you. And much to my amazement, she said yes. I went up to London from Bristol and asked her advice about how I could possibly move from working on editing educational books, which was what I'd been trained in. I studied French and German at university. I'm a linguist, but I edited all sorts of educational books for different publishers. And so I said, how can I transfer from language teaching books to wine books? She welcomed me into her house. We had a chat and she gave me some ideas. And as I left, I said, what I'd really like to do is work for you. And she laughed and said, oh, I'm never going to employ anybody. I'm a control freak. And that was that. Except we kept in touch, and she actually asked me to do a job for her, a freelance job, which was, concentrating the Oxford Companion down into a concise Oxford Companion, which meant taking out about 2/3 of the words. So I did that as a freelance. And then I carried on doing my studies, working as an editor. And eventually I got through to my diploma. I got a scholarship to work with a small supermarket chain who have a very good range of wines called Waitrose. And while I was there, I ran the press tastings. which meant I stayed in touch with Jancis. And they also put me through my Master of Wine qualifications. So that was really the process but it was a lot to do with education, but always education with a view to pleasure. But always also that contact with Jancis that I kept in touch, always had a hope that maybe she'd change her mind. And it actually took 7 years from my very first saying to her, I'd really like to work for you, to actually working for her full time. 7 years of perseverance and cheek.
Well, number one, that shows that persistence pays off. Two, so can you give us a little bit of a sense of like a time period? When you went to work with her, did you go work on jancisrobinson.com or Purple Pages? Was that your first kind of intro, or were you specifically working with her on the books first? What was your first kind of employment with her like?
Well, it was I think it must have been 2004. I just passed my Master of Wine exams and the dissertation. And I'd been working part-time. I have to get the timeline right. I was working part-time on the Oxford Companion, working with Jancis, because I had contacted her when I passed my MW and said, I hear you're doing a new edition of the Oxford Companion. That was number 3. Now we're on 5, but this was number 3. And again, I just took all my courage in my hands and said, just past my MW, would you like some help with the Oxford Companion? I mean, who would say that except somebody desperate to persuade somebody? But fortunately, she said yes. So I then persuaded my employer, this company Waitrose, to let me go part-time. So I did 2 years part-time, 2004, 2005, purely on the Oxford Companion, and part-time working the other job. And then at the end of those 2 years, my employers said, we don't really like this idea of part-time. It's either full-time or nothing. So I said to Jancis, well, I have an ultimatum from my employers. What do you think? And she said, yes, come and work full-time for me. So that was December 2005. And she was just about to start work with Hugh Johnson on the next edition of the World Atlas of Wine. So I think I had 2 weeks off and went to Chile and Argentina for the first time on so-called holiday, but you know what those wine holidays are like. And came back, started work on the Wine Atlas. But because by that time, I was full-time with Jancis, I was also writing on the website. So from that point on, from the end of 2005, it's always been a mixture of writing for jancisrobinson.com and then working on the books when the books were needed to be revised. So it was always integrated, the two together.
So I just went back up to talk about your dissertation. You kind of breeze past on the Master of Wine, like finishing your Master of Wine. Can we take a step back and just have you tell us a little bit about what you wrote about for your final paper and sort of what went into that process?
My original idea was to compare different types of ripening particularly on Cabernet Sauvignon. I kept hearing marketing people, telling me that their wines from, for example, the Uca Valley high up in Argentina were so good because of the high diurnal temperature range between daytime and nighttime temperatures. So I began to wonder, is it actually better, or is it just that you can't make great wine if it's really hot all the time? If you've got an equable climate such as Bordeaux, is that as good or better than one with a high diurnal temperature range? So I presented this idea to the Institute of Masters of Wine, and they said, oh no, it's much too complicated. You can't do that. You'll never get it done in 10,000 words and 6 months or 9 months. Unfortunately, I'd already done a bit of research. I'd been to California, I'd been to visit Paul Draper Ridge, done some research in Bordeaux, been to Argentina, and had to completely change the plan. And unfortunately, I had to do something much more boring. So I looked at the question of different types of wines produced in the Loire Valley, much easier to get to from the UK, and how they got to market in the UK. So it was a much more of a marketing, distribution, wine style question rather than a technical one. But I suppose it was more manageable. I had to accept it was maybe more chance of passing than the really complicated ripening one, but less interesting.
Well, have you come back to that question since then? Do you have any long form writing on that topic? Yeah, since then.
Sadly not. I think it requires a book
I see,
and
yeah.
a lot more time, and more time than I've got on top of the day job. But it's always in the back of my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it it certainly is to properly flesh it out and explore even the nuances between so many regions that grow Cabernet Sauvignon now, because so many people try, regardless if it grows well there or not. So I think that'd be fascinating. We'll stay tuned for that one. Well, do we want to pivot a little bit now that we have a sense of your background? Actually, I have one question before we get on to the Oxford, the 5th edition of the Companion to Wine. Well, I guess you can't say if you have a favorite, but how was writing wine grapes? And is Villemot as cool as he sounds from all the interviews and stuff that I've heard? He sounds like just like the coolest guy to hang out with or work with.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think we made quite an interesting trio. The really amazing thing was that in the period of 4 years that it took us to write the book, because there's such a big difference starting from scratch and doing a new edition. And this was starting from scratch. Nobody had ever written a book of that length and depth before. And in that period of 4 years, I think we were in the same room twice. And all the rest of the communication was by email.
Wow.
We had an initial meeting to discuss it. And the original idea that Jose had was to do something like the top 20 grape varieties. And gradually that morphed into every single grape variety being commercially made into wine and bottled and sold commercially. There was quite a gestation of the idea of the book. And what the best thing about working the three of us together was that we all had our strengths, I would say. So Jose was brilliant on all the DNA, also very good on researching the etymology of wine names and the family relationships. And then between us, Jancis and I would cover where it was grown, what the wines were like. And we'd also pull in Jose's experience, because we had the three of us out, all of our tasting experience, producers, wines that we tasted, and just bringing all three different networks of connections, tasting experiences, travel experiences, made a really strong team. But we all had a very clear roles that we had within that team. But yeah, Jose's very cool. He's got very cool hats.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll have to try to find some photos of him now. Cool. Well, I will think of him now with hats on when I read the book. But cool. So let's get to the Oxford Companion to Wine 5th edition. Something I didn't realize when I had first even started reading this is that there are other Oxford Companions to other things. So could you explain briefly to our audience, since they're mostly an American audience, what the Oxford Companion to anything is, and then what it is for wine and what the main goal of it is?
I can't tell you which the first Oxford Companions were, but they probably were things like English literature, music, philosophy. There's now a lot of Oxford Companions to something. There's classical literature, American literature, law, American law, world mythology, food, cheese. There's all sorts of topics now. Become a much bigger series. But it's really, I think it takes the idea of the authoritativeness of the Oxford English Dictionary and brings a subject matter into that idea of depth and breadth and a detailed, accurate authority on a particular topic. But the other key thing, and that's key to the Oxford Companion, is the contributors. We can't write this book without the contributors. They are our gold, if you like. Some of the entries would be written by the editors, and in this edition, I just mentioned this edition, Jancis handed the baton to me to be the lead editor. She was still strongly involved. She covered about 10% and covered certain topics that she wanted to do. And then for this edition, for the first time, we brought on board Tara Thomas, who was the executive editor of Wine and Spirits for, I think, nearly 25 years. So what we really appreciated was not only Tara's expertise as an editor, but also her perspective being a North American with a European passion. I would probably say she's probably a fairly European North American, but she's still a North American and has all of the understanding, living there, the language. I mean, that was a big thing. Well, between me and Tara was making sure that we understood each other, and I didn't use any British English language that I might, between us, Jancis and I on a previous edition, might not have realized that something we were saying was very British. And Tara would say, well, what does that mean? We don't say that. And vice versa. So I hope very much that one of the things that we really gained with Tara, apart from her great network of contacts and the brilliant way she's managed all their geographical entries, is her North American perspective. And I think that's made the book much more international, less British, maybe, or less European. Was that the question? Did I answer the question?
Yeah, that was perfect. No, I think that was, I hadn't really thought about that. I've leafed through and read a number of entries so far, and I thought they were really approachable. And I did notice more of a geographical focus, and we have some questions coming up on that. So I think that makes sense. Can you just
to go back to the question of what a companion is? I think one thing that we've tried to do is to bring balanced coverage, but without it being so balanced, it's bland and dull. So we try to keep a voice, an editorial voice, and sometimes the contributors have their own voices, depending on their first language, but trying to bring that authoritative approach, but without it being dry and dull. And one of the other keys, I think, to this book is the cross-references. And I believe those are used in other companions because it's such a complex and interwoven subject, wine. There are so many entries where you really need to look at something else in order to understand that entry, and you can't keep repeating yourself. So it's a really tightly knit book with references to all sorts of entries, and it takes you on a wild goose chase around the book. Sometimes you start reading one entry and 2 hours later you think, oh, how did I get here? And you've just been following cross-references.
Oh, 100%. I think I've probably told my fiance a number of times, like that's one of my only qualms with the book is when you pick it up to look up one thing, to your exact point, you end up like way away from what you were originally looking up. And then by the time you're done, you're like, you forgot the answer to the first thing you were looking up in the first place. But it's so cool because everything is so interesting when you start diving in, and there are things that you would never have thought were related. But I will say, so taking one step back though. So the Oxford Companion to Wine, I think I read a description saying it was trying to organize it like a dictionary, but have like the editorial component and kind of the descriptions like an encyclopedia. So it's really a book that's meant to not only touch on a range of topics and be a reference guide, but also give you additional color and insight into whatever the topic you want to learn more about. Is that kind of a succinct way to describe it?
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to describe it. We've tried to cover every aspect of wine and the wine world. I'm not saying we've succeeded. We try, and every edition brings in new things, which they could be something has changed, or it could be we suddenly think, oh, we should have reprinted this in the last edition, and every edition gets better and better. I mean, poor Jancis on the first edition, she was working with 800 blank pages. Can you imagine starting with that? And what's more, no email. Everything came in on fax or paper post. And I believe there was somebody at Oxford University Press who transcribed things and sent them to Jancis. And she was working on some sort of rudimentary word processor, I think. And trying to do that now we'd have such a luxury of the internet, email. So yes, it's I think it's getting broader and deeper. But then the difficulty is you don't have limitless pages. You have to keep it concise.
Yeah, I think one thing that when you look at a book that's mainly like most wine books that are mainly used for reference, there's sometimes a component of miss the storytelling, right? And so I think like the combination of this is a dictionary, this is also an editorial, and you have those kind of like blurbs and outtakes and almost like mini essays, incredibly helpful with weaving sort of the total story together. Because if you lose context of a story and you only focus on facts, especially in something like wine, you miss the whole picture.
Well, exactly, and that's why we have the topics in the book are clearly viticulture, winemaking, packaging, people, brands, history. It tries to be the world of wine rather than the sort of book you might read if you were studying for an exam. Although I believe that lots of students like myself use it for exams. I used it for exams, but we really hope that it's readable enough. And as you say, has the stories about people and what they do and what's changing in wine, so that it's not just a reference book. It's actually one that you want to read. And that's why you keep going from entry to entry, because you think, I'd really like to know about yeast. And then you read, and then you think, no, I really like to know about something else. And it just takes you on, or then it takes you to a country. You don't stick with viticulture or winemaking. It takes you around the world of wine, which is, I think, makes it more readable and enjoyable.
Well, and it helps you introduce readers to, especially talking about new regions, new countries who maybe are coming into the spotlight, because you can say, we know these stories and of the producers and their wines and the legacy of their labels here. There's also something very similar going on in another country. Let me take you there, and you can tie everything together that way. Otherwise, it's just in Germany they do this, in Estonia now they're doing that. So exactly. Yeah, I really like that. I think it's a good way to bring people, like you said, around a tour of around the world.
The other piece I think is interesting when you're studying for an exam. I would say like your earliest exams, you learn a little bit about wine and you think you know everything, and then there's now that common saying: the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. I think this book is the epitome of that, because you're like, yes, like I want to look up this answer to tell somebody, and then you're like, crap, and then by the time you're trying to explain what the answer is, you're like, well, there's 40 things I didn't know, so I'm less equipped. But no, I love that. I think Brady's been the victim of some of those things. He asks me a simple question, and then I give him the Oxford companion, but the rundown, the rabbit hole answer.
Nice to hear it.
Can we? Well, I want to talk about what's new in this edition and what you guys kind of like focused on a little bit. But first, I still want to know the contributors. I think there's like over 100. Is that right? Like, how do you find these people? How are they selected? And then, I don't know. How does it all come together in the end there?
Well, for this edition, the total number of contributors is 267.
Wow.
Of which 100 are new to the 5th edition. Jancis started out with a certain number of contributors. I don't honestly know how many there were in the 1st edition. And then for every subsequent edition, there'd be a consideration for the existing entries, is that contributor still at the top of their game? Are they still working in that field? Or is there somebody else we'd like to refer to? And generally speaking, we would go back to previous contributors. Sometimes they'd say, I think you should talk to so-and-so, not me anymore. But for new entries, or if we felt that an entry needed bigger update, we would use, again, it's a bit like the Wine Grapes book. There's 3 editors with very broad experience and many connections and many people, many networks. There would be our own experience. There would then be a process of research. So suppose, for example, I was writing an entry on underwater aging. It was a new entry. And so I would research, look who was doing it. Who else? I knew some people already, but I didn't know everybody. And I would contact them, ask their feelings were. And if I discovered that they'd done some scientific research, I could get that information from them. And then I found an academic in Burgundy who'd also looked at some of this topic, and then I would contact him. It's a combination of the people we know, people we've come across, and then research into who's writing about this, who's at the top of the game, who is really, and for geographical entries, who's on the ground, ideally. And that's, I think, really improved this edition. We've had more local people rather than one person doing a whole area. North America is a really good example. California, it's divided up and better covered by more people than one person trying to cover the whole thing, which is a big area to cover. It's partly the people we already know, and then the research that we do to try and find people they could be academics, they could be practitioners, winemakers, viticulturists, journalists, historians, just about anybody who is the expert in that topic.
Yeah, I think I'm a sucker for wine history, so I love that component of this as well. Another wine history book. I'm still working my way through Hugh Johnson's The Story of Wine. I listened to it in like snippets, and I've been listening to it for like almost a year now. Still have like 11 hours left, but I'm in the 1700s now. It's great. So you've touched on a little bit of the new regions, or regions. Let's talk about that. Some of the newer ones that are included in the book, and then maybe if you want to add a little bit of color about, I don't know, maybe the climate change aspect, or how some of these regions, have they traditionally grown grapes? Is it just now possible? Were they marginal and now they're coming on? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, why now?
I think you suggested linking it with climate change. That's definitely true of some of the new wine regions, but actually there's an awful lot of updates and changes that are related to climate change, not just new regions. But taking that first, for example, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, in the past they've mainly done fruit wines. They haven't really had the climate to ripen grapes fully. And an interesting example is Norway. I had about 2 sentences in the last edition and now has 2 really full paragraphs. Their climate change has allowed producers to go, or creative people who just really want to make wine, to move further north. Also higher up, we've got more about higher elevation wine growing in Bhutan and Peru, for example. In Europe, Brittany in France was really too cool before. There's a lot of regions that are developing because of climate change, but there's a lot of other entries that have changed or needed new entries because of climate change that are to do with viticulture and winemaking. There's climate change and regions. There's also our response to climate change. For example, sustainability entries, regenerative viticulture entry, carbon footprint of wine, all these sort of things, geotextiles to help in really cold climates. It's not just the heat. Different grape varieties being developed, moving to new regions because they cope better with drought or heat. There's an awful lot of entries, as well as the entries that are actually about climate, that tie into the changing world, the changing environmental world we live in, but also our response to it. As I said, sustainability. And then you'd have entries about packaging, which are also related to sustainability, which goes back to the environment. There's so many, in the same way that the book is so interconnected, many of the changes in the wine world are interconnected as well.
Brady, did you want to hop in there? I feel like I've been monopolizing the conversation.
Just going back to the question of new regions, we've also got new entries on some African countries, Gabon, Senegal, Uganda. And there, I don't think it's really anything to do with climate change. It's just to do with people's creativity and ingenuity. They think, why don't we could make wine here. We're just trying to make sure that we are aware of what people are doing. And I mean, like Gabon, I remember somebody just mentioning it to me and I thought, oh, great, make wine in Gabon. And so sometimes it's lucky that we've heard about it because you don't always really come across some of these countries' winemaking. So it's not entirely climate change, but to be honest, most of the most of the changes in the book are related to it in terms of regions, but also things like pests and diseases. Pierce's disease has for a long time been a big problem in Southern California. And in recent years, it's been found in olive trees in Southern Europe. And now also, unfortunately, I think in Mallorca, in vines. That again is related, I think, but I believe to be related to climate change, also to globalization, the way that everything gets taken everywhere. There are no borders anymore. But where diseases are spread, and then the other aspect would be, then you have to think about entries to talk about how you control diseases. And that could be in two directions. It could be breeding grape varieties that will adapt better will be more resistant to pests and diseases. They have better resistance, for example, to powdery mildew, downy mildew in particular. And then you've got the varieties that particularly bred, the so-called peewee varieties. That requires an extension in the book of those. They were covered a bit before, but we had to expand that because that's a big area of research. It's almost impossible to tear apart the topics and to explain why one area is updated because there's so many connections. And then you've got all the way people change their drinking styles, or whether they want to drink lower alcohol wine, and the language that they use. We didn't have an entry before on glue glue. We have a glue glue entry for gluggable, easy drinking wines. So it's also in language. Another entry, new one, is celebrity wine. I mean, that's got nothing to do with climate change, but nobody talked about celebrity wine 10 years ago. Sorry, I'm going off a tangent, pal. I'll hand back to you.
That's all right. Well, the first question that came to mind as you were talking, but now I want to talk about celebrity wine. The first question that I had was of these, maybe when new regions come online or you explore the practices in a place like Gabon or Senegal or even Uganda, do you notice any sort of similarities as these emerging regions come online in terms of maybe similarities in the challenges that they face, or is that all different and varied? Or do you see any similarities in terms of what sort of demand is driving interest in those areas? For instance, one type of drinker is really increasing in terms of consumption, and the wines of a particular emerging region sort of suit that demographic? Or what can you say about the similarities of the ones that are emerging in this space right now?
I would say the main driver is individuals who think, we could make wine here. Most of the obstacles would be climatic, I would say, water, heat, or in some areas. So, for example, this isn't a new area, but Thailand, humidity, and having to manage whether you have 2 crops a year or 1 crop a year. So I think the challenges would be almost entirely climatic. I don't think the market question is the biggest question with these new areas. I don't think everybody's saying, oh, well, I really want to try a wine from Uganda. I think it's more coming from individuals who think we could make good wine here.
So it's more about maybe like opportunity and then the resources to take action in those areas. So has there been more outside investment? Or I'm just wondering who's in Senegal, for instance, sitting around on Monday saying, oh, we should start growing grapes, then starts doing that on Friday. Is there outside capital coming in, or is there really like a grassroots movement in some of these countries to pick up and start exploring that?
I don't think you can generalize. I think it's a bit of both. There may be a grassroots, but they probably need some investment or some investment, either financially or in terms of expertise in viticulture. I know that some of the work done in tropical climates has been really supported by 2 guys who are from Geisenheim in Germany. So you might be investing knowledge as well as finances. But I don't think there's a one answer to that question. I think it's very much local to the area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if timing just in like a geopolitical realm is having an impact too, because I imagine that some of these countries that maybe got post-colonial era got their independence in the middle 1900s sometime, maybe there was like a pushback against wine, and now it's been long enough where it's viewed as something they could own rather than something that people who previously came and might have brought it. I wonder if that's kind of a potential impact in maybe some of the African countries at least.
I think it could be. I don't think I know enough to really say that for each of those. I don't know enough about the country, and that a fairly restricted entry about the winemaking doesn't really. I haven't got the history, and like say the colonial history to answer that.
Yeah, me neither. But now you have me thinking, and I'm like, oh, maybe there's like these amazing Grand Cru like parcels that we just don't know about because nobody's ever farmed them. They're going to come online. That would be amazing. Also, I'll let Brady ask his celebrity question, but I will say in our area, I live in Los Angeles, and where I am, there's a lot of these quote unquote natural wine bars, and there is actually a wine just called Glue Glue, and it's so funny how people that I had learned the term just by reading in my studies, but now it's almost common vernacular amongst people who don't even really drink wine what Glue Glue is, and I just think it's hilarious. So I think it's definitely necessary for the companion because you have non-serious wine drinkers walking around asking for Glue Glue at restaurants. So I think that's hilarious.
But it's interesting though, because I don't think it's quite as common in the UK as it is in the US.
Yeah. Well, also you guys have the term quaffable, and I don't think anybody here understands that. But when they want something that's easy to drink without thinking, they say like Glue Glue or something like that. So.
Yeah, my celebrity wine question. Just wonder what the perspectives were that you guys, because I haven't seen that section in the book yet. What can you share with the audience? Sort of what was the approach to, first, why did you include a section on celebrity wines, and what was the approach to providing information in that space, and what's the kind of perspective shared?
We have to, every time we finish a book, an edition of the Oxford Companion, as soon as the text goes to the printer, I start a file about corrections or updates for the next edition. So for about 8 years, I'm compiling this massive document that we then have to go through at the beginning of the next edition. So we have a list of all the headwords of the previous edition on a spreadsheet with who the contributor was, how many words it was, and then we have to go through and think, are there any entries that we don't want to keep, which is rare, but it happens. And then what are the new entries? But then I have to go through this document and think, are there any areas in here that need to be in the book? And that would be things that I've read about or we've read about or heard about. And so if something has become currency in the language, like celebrity wine, and it's something that's become more common, then it's something that has to go in the book because that's what it's a phrase that people use.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it came about. And then we just look around and see who's doing it.
Yeah, I think we've had, I guess, a couple different conversations at different times on the podcast about the both influence that celebrity quote unquote winemakers or celebrity backed labels have on the industry and people's perception maybe of a region or a certain variety. I guess this is mostly a phenomenon in terms of the coverage in the companion in North America. Is that right? Or is this something that also see a lot of in Europe as well?
I think it would be dominated by North America. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There are definitely some quote unquote celebrity wines who are really advancing a region and a variety forward in like new markets. And then there are others who it's very obviously just like a branding deal or some kind of cash grab that way and not really taking the wine that seriously.
I think it's mostly a branding deal, but there's some where they actually care about the wine.
Yeah, of course.
It's a good thing, celebrity wine.
I think insofar as it gets more people to drink wine, whatever the quality, I think that's the first step, right? Get more people to drink bad wine or wine at all, right? And then eventually they can, progress through. So I guess that's the 10,000 foot view is as long as more people are drinking, it's good. On the other hand, sometimes those labels can overshadow other smaller producers, maybe with less capital or less distribution because of follower status or celebrity or things like that. And so that can maybe be a shame in certain regions. But I think at the end of the day, in terms of quality in the wine world, as experts and enthusiasts, quality on the long term will rise to the top. So I'm not as concerned about that. And I think so probably the positive of more people drinking likely outweighs it a bit for me.
And then you made me, I've just remembered one of the entries that we did take out, which it's quite an interesting comparison. It was cool. It was critter labels. Do you remember critter labels?
Critter.
It started off with
like little
like Yellowtail has a kangaroo.
Exactly.
Just having
It started off with Yellowtail, and it was a whole rash of animals, and they were very popular. Maybe they were the predecessors of celebrity wine.
Interesting. That's funny.
I agree. It's good to get people drinking wine, but I also think it's a shame if they stick with the celebrity wine and don't branch out. But then I think that's a shame with any instance where someone just always drinks the same wine and doesn't have the confidence or isn't encouraged to try something different. Because for me, the best thing about wine is its diversity and the fact that I'll never ever try everything. And if I limited myself to one or two wines, I think that would be a shame. I'd be depriving myself of a huge amount of pleasure. And I feel that for people who do stick with one or two celebrity wines, I think it's great to try them, but just don't stick with them.
I think there's probably a factor around pricing that's at play there, because I don't know anyone who is drinking just say $75 celebrity wine and that's all they drink, right? So these celebrity wines maybe are $25 and below or $30 and below. Maybe they're only drinking in that space, but it's hard for smaller producers to compete at some of those price points, depending on the variety and region and stuff. But it's hard for smaller producers to compete at those price points. And so I feel like the only hope is that consumer gets more interested and then also maybe increases the amount that they're willing to spend on a particular wine to actually get them out of that sort of celebrity wine funk or the pattern of only drinking those wines. Like you're saying, is I do agree that it's not where you want people to stay, but
if it's an introduction, that's great.
Agreed. I don't know if you've heard of the book Wine Wars 1 and 2. This guy, Mike Veseth, Veseth, he calls himself the wine economist, and he goes into the nuances of celebrity wines. It's also, I think he touches on the critter labels, and he says there's two camps in wine, the terroirists, who are like, you need to be like appreciating wine and enjoying it and like telling the full story, where it's like there's the other camp who's just trying to get more people to drink wine in general, and then that's better for the macro wine industry. It's an interesting, you could go on. Obviously he wrote 2 books about this, so I think it could go on forever, but I recommend it if people want more reading on that topic outside of get your Oxford Companion to Wine and then add this as a supplement. He also has not wanted to come on the podcast. So Mike, if you're listening, come on. For the pivoting, looking forward now a little bit, since we're going to get close here on time and we don't want to keep you too long. For over the next 5 to 10 years, kind of what trends are you seeing now that you expect to snowball and grow? Or is there anything you're seeing now that you think might peter out and not really be worthy of noting as much in the next version of the Oxford Companion?
I think the trends that we're seeing now, some of them we've touched upon, which is the need for greater sustainability and I know that word is used very vaguely, but I guess I'm talking about better stewardship of the land. Attempts made to, for example, to increase carbon sequestration, carbon capture from fermentation, for example, reducing the cost of transport by using bulk packaging, bulk transport, lighter packaging. I think all those things are going to continue because that's the way our world is moving, and we've got to keep combating the effects of climate change. I think also the development of grape varieties that have better resistance to diseases, fungal diseases in particular. I'm not sure how well they will do. I think because they're not genetically modified, they're typically using genetic technology, but not genetic modification, or they're bred over many years to incorporate a little bit of the genetics of a non-vinifera, a vitis vinifera variety. I think all those techniques will be more and more important because we will have to have grape varieties that will cope better with climate change. Also, I think better understanding of what grows where, what can grow where, the moving of maybe some varieties from really hot or Mediterranean climates that could grow outside of those regions that are well adapted to drought and heat, that sort of thing. Moving when you're planting in cooler regions, different elevation, different north facing in the northern hemisphere, for example, versus south facing. So all these things, I think they will increase. And also, consumption trends. People are drinking less generally. Consumption is going down. There's in the news at the moment is all the need in southern France and Bordeaux, for example, pull up vineyards. There's too much capacity. There's more wine available than there is than being drunk. So all these things are going to play into how people drink, what people drink. Plus, all the thing we haven't talked about is health and lower alcohol or even no alcohol wines. I think those are going to continue more. There's a greater emphasis than ever, I think, on people's awareness of their health and alcohol. And that's something that I think will need more and more careful investigation because it's very, very difficult to assess all of the information that you hear and all the research that's done into wine and health. It's a lot of it seems contradictory and quite difficult to pull together. I think that would be another side of things that I hope maybe also continuing interest in local, small, rather than big conglomerate type wine companies. I think that's more of a hope than an expectation. And then continuing to fight against diseases that are really spreading, like trunk diseases like SCA, or they're really causing problems in everywhere, but huge areas of Europe that are struggling with ESCA, and whether you have to pull out the vineyard, replant, whether you can cut out the dead wood, all these sort of research, finding the best solutions, all these things will inform updates. It's a never-ending job. So as soon as you finish one edition, you've got to start revising it for the next edition.
You could do a companion on each region. And still update it every year.
Yeah.
Julia, thanks so much for coming on and chatting with us. I think there's probably, like I said, we could go section by section and break down, the entire companion. Appreciate all the work that you've done, both in supporting other writers and also yourself in putting together such a wealth of information out there. Hopefully more wine drinkers graduate to digesting this kind of material and not even graduate, but see it as something that's accessible for themselves to continue their wine journey.
Well, I hope so. And I hope people think of it as, it looks quite daunting, but it's actually something you can dip in and out of. You don't have to read it from cover to cover. You can take little steps into a big book.
Yeah, that's the best part. Dipping in. Yeah. Dipping in and then staying there accidentally for an hour. Also, you guys have the Oxford Companion. If you want like just quick research on the website as well on Jancis Robinson, that's my on the go version when I can't bring the book with me everywhere. Also, like I don't know if I'm as much in the last version. I didn't compare page to page, but there's a lot of beautiful visuals in this version too, and helpful things to give further color to things. So I think that's really also a huge benefit for anybody trying to learn. So yeah, again, thank you so much for joining, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you. I've enjoyed talking to you.
All right. That was our interview with Julia Harding. I hope everybody got a little bit of insight into how these books are made, how many people and how much time actually goes into creating something so thorough and extensive. And she's already hard at work on the 6th edition, which don't worry, if you get this one, they don't come out for a number of years at a time. So you'll be good for many years, but you should go get the 5th edition now. I have it. It's beautiful. Highly recommended. But yeah, that is our episode for this week. We'll be back with another interview and another episode next week. Cheers.
To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vint platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vint podcast, please email us at support@vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circular as amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications, including this podcast, is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.